Imagine, imagine for a second that you are a surgeon,
Okay.
and not just any surgeon. You are at the absolute top of your field.
Right, the leading expert.
Exactly. And you've been invited to this massive, prestigious medical conference to present your research. And your research is on this specific disease that is just rotting the bones of the patients.
A disease you have spent your entire life studying.
You know the pathology, you know exactly how the infection spreads, and most importantly, you know the cure.
Sounds like a great opportunity to save lives.
You would think so.
Eh.
But 3 days before you're supposed to give this keynote, the organizers, who are also doctors, mind you, they call you up in an absolute panic.
Because they read your draft.
They read the draft, and they are terrified. They tell you, look, you can still come speak, but you have to cut the part about the virus being inside the hospital.
Wow.
And you definitely, absolutely cannot mention that our own hygiene practices are what is spreading the disease.
So they're basically saying, come give the keynote, but whatever you do, do not tell the truth.
Exactly. And I mean, most people in that position, you'd probably compromise, right?
Yeah, you'd think, well, it's better to get some of the message out there than nothing at all. I'll water it down.
Right, you'd soften the edges. But the man we are diving into today, he didn't operate like that. He sent a message back that basically said, I will not change a single comma.
And that refusal right there is arguably one of the most pivotal moments in the history of sociology.
Because the conference was canceled, the speech was never delivered.
But it didn't disappear.
No. The text of that undelivered speech, Annihilation of Caste, by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he went ahead and printed 1,500 copies out of his own pocket.
And that little self-published booklet caused a shockwave that drew in Mahatma Gandhi and honestly changed global social theory forever.
It's the speech that wasn't that became the manifesto, that is. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are not just doing, a dry history lesson on India in 1936.
Definitely not.
We are looking at what I think is one of the most rigorous structural deconstructions of a society ever written.
Structural deconstruction is the perfect term for it.
We've got a huge stack of sources here to go through. We have the original text, obviously. We have the correspondence between Ambedkar and the organizers.
And we also have some heavy modern commentary from thinkers like Arundhati Roy and sociologists like Gopal Guru.
And our mission today for this deep dive is to really understand the architecture of oppression. And I know you really want to emphasize that word, architecture.
I do, because Ambedkar isn't just saying caste is mean or discrimination is a bad thing. He is literally taking the engine of society apart.
Laying out all the pieces on the floor.
Exactly. He's looking at the gears. We're going to talk about why he distinguishes between a division of labor and a division of laborers.
Which is fascinating.
We're going to unpack graded inequality, which is this terrifyingly genius concept that explains why oppressed people sometimes oppress others.
And why revolutions fail. And, of course, we are inevitably going to get into the heavyweight title fight between Ambedkar and Gandhi.
The clash of the titans. We'll look at both their arguments impartially, just seeing what they actually said.
Plus the gateway concept. How controlling women is the literal linchpin of the caste system. So much to cover. But before we get to the heavy sociology, we have to set the scene.
The context is crucial here.
Take us back to Lahore, 1936. Who are these organizers who invited him, and why did they panic so badly?
Well, to really understand the invite, you have to rewind just a few months prior to October 1935.
Okay.
There was a conference in a town called Yola. And Dr. Ambedkar, who at this point had spent decades fighting for the rights of the untouchables, the depressed classes, he stands up and drops an absolute bombshell on the Indian political landscape.
What's a bombshell?
He says, I was born a Hindu, but I will not die as one.
Wow, so he's announcing a mass exodus.
It was a seismic rupture. You have to understand that up until that exact moment, the entire national conversation around caste was about uplift. Right. It was about reform. People were asking, how do we make the house more comfortable for everyone? How do we let the untouchables into the temple? How do we treat them better?
It was all about renovation, fixing up the existing structure.
Exactly. But Yola was Ambedkar standing up and saying, the renovation is canceled. I am moving out of the house, and I am taking millions of people with me.
That is a massive shift from uplift to total liberation, exiting the system entirely.
Yes. So, in the middle of this absolute political firestorm, a group of Hindu reformers decides to invite him to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference.
Which just seems, honestly, a bit masochistic on their part. Why invite the guy who just said he's leaving your religion?
It does seem wild. The group was called the Jat Pat Todak Mandal. In English, that roughly translates to the group for the breaking of caste.
Okay, so they were technically on the same side. They wanted to break caste too.
Ostensibly, yes. They were a reformist group of caste Hindus, mostly upper caste, and they wanted to modernize Hinduism.
What was their specific goal?
Their big goal was to eliminate the subcastes, the petty divisions. They wanted to create a unified, single Hindu society. So they thought, hey, who better to headline our anti-caste conference than the most famous critic of caste?
They thought they were getting a fellow reformer? They probably assumed he'd come in and say, let's all just drop the sub-labels and be nicer to each other.
Precisely. They expected a critique of social evils, a speech about how the practice of untouchability is bad. But then Ambedkar sends them the manuscript of what he actually plans to say.
And that's when the panic sets in.
When the secretary of the group, a man named Sant Ram, reads it, the blood must have just drained from his face, because Ambedkar wasn't attacking the practice of caste. He was attacking the sanction.
He was going for the root of the tree.
He wasn't saying Hindus are behaving badly. He was saying Hindus are behaving exactly as their scriptures tell them to.
Oh, wow.
He attacked the Vedas. He attacked the Puranas. He essentially argued that you cannot have Hinduism without caste, so if you really want to get rid of caste, you have to dynamite the religion's foundation.
And for a group of reformers who wanted to save Hinduism by purifying it, this was just a bridge too far. It was unbearable.
It was a declaration of war on their core beliefs. They wrote back to him, and the letters back and forth are just fascinating to read today.
They start pleading with him.
Yeah. They say, look, Dr. Ambedkar, those passages where you question the divine authority of the Vedas, can you just cut those? We want to convince the Orthodox people to change. If you attack their holy books, they'll just stop listening.
It's the classic moderate argument. Don't alienate the people you're trying to win over. Meet them where they are.
And Ambedkar's response is the stuff of legend. He realized right then that this wasn't just about a single speech. It was a test of their entire reformist project.
He found the ceiling.
Exactly. He exposed that Hindu reformism had a ceiling it could not break through. They were willing to talk about social change, but only as long as it didn't challenge the divine authority of their texts.
So he gives them the ultimatum. Or rather, he rejects theirs. He refuses to censor himself to suit the audience.
Intellectual integrity over having a platform. The conference gets canceled, which essentially proved his exact point about their limitations. He prints the speech himself, and it sparks a firestorm.
Okay, so let's actually pick up that text, the one that scared them so badly.
Yeah.
I want to get into the sociological anatomy of caste that he lays out.
Let's do it.
Because reading this today, I was struck by how incredibly modern his analysis feels. He tackles these standard defenses of caste that, let's be honest, people still use today.
Oh, absolutely. The arguments haven't changed much.
You know the main one. The argument that says, look, caste is just a division of labor. It's like the medieval guilds in Europe. You're a shoemaker, so your son is a shoemaker. It creates expertise. It's just functionally efficient.
Right. The economic efficiency defense, it sounds logical on the surface. Specialization is good for society. But Ambedkar destroys this with one razor-sharp distinction.
Division of labor versus division of laborers.
Yes. He says, sure, every civilized society needs a division of labor. People need to do different jobs. But the caste system is a division of laborers.
Break down that functional difference for us. Why is that distinction so critical?
A division of labor is natural. It's based on aptitude, choice, and economic demand. If you have steady hands and a sharp mind, you might choose to become a surgeon.
Like our intro.
Exactly. If you have great physical strength, you might work in construction. It's fluid. People move to where they are best suited and where they are needed.
Right. But a division of laborers.
A division of laborers is a watertight compartment based entirely on birth. It completely disconnects your job from your actual aptitude.
Doesn't matter what you're good at.
No. It doesn't matter if you have the mind of a mathematical genius. If you are born into the scavenger caste, you are a scavenger. That is your destiny.
Which, if you think about it from just a pure economic standpoint, is disastrous. You are wasting human talent on a massive scale.
It is wildly inefficient.
It makes me think of that old quote about how many Einsteins died working in cotton fields or sweatshops. In this case, how many brilliant engineers or doctors were forced to sweep streets or clean latrines because of their birth?
It's an incalculable loss of potential. But Ambedkar goes even deeper than the economics. He talks about the psychology of it. He says this system creates job aversion.
Job aversion, meaning people hate their work.
Think about it. If you choose to be a janitor because it pays the bills, it offers stability, and you don't mind the work, that's one thing. You can have dignity in that.
Sure.
But if you are forced to be a janitor by birth, and the entire society tells you that doing this work makes you inherently polluted, that you are less than human because of the job you do, are you going to take pride in that work?
Of course not. You're going to resent it. You're going to do the bare minimum to survive.
Exactly. It kills the dignity of labor. There's no innovation because there is no passion or incentive. Ambedkar argues that caste doesn't just oppress individuals, it actively strangles the entire economy. It makes work a punishment.
It makes work a life sentence. But the concept that really truly stopped me in my tracks, and I think this is the absolute core of his structural argument, is this idea of graded inequality.
Yes, this is his absolute masterstroke.
Because usually, when we talk about oppression, right, whether we're looking at Marxism or anti-colonial struggles or modern social justice movements, we almost always think in binaries.
A clean line, us versus them.
Exactly. The 1% versus the 99%. The bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. The oppressor and the oppressed. Two distinct groups.
But Ambedkar says caste isn't a wall dividing two groups, it's a ladder.
An ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt. That phrase is just chilling. Ascending reverence, descending contempt. Let's unpack how that actually works.
The best way to visualize it is to imagine a high-rise building. Let's say it has 4 floors, but there are no stairs and there's no elevator.
You are stuck where you're born.
Right. Now, if you are on the top floor, the Brahmin, everyone below you reveres you. You are at the top of the ascending scale of reverence.
Okay.
And if you are on the very bottom floor, the Shudra or the untouchable, everyone above you looks down on you. You bear the full weight of the descending scale of contempt.
But the really insidious part is the middle floors, right?
The middle floors are the genius of the system, the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas. The people in the middle are being oppressed by the people above them. They have to show reverence to the Brahmin on floor 4.
They are subordinate.
But, and this is the key mechanism, they get to oppress the people below them.
They get a target for their own contempt.
Exactly. Even if I am being crushed and humiliated by the guy on floor 4, I can turn around and step on the guy on floor 2.
And that feeling of superiority, that feeling of, well, my life might be hard, but at least I am not that guy down there, that is a powerful drug.
It creates a psychological wage. It gives the oppressed a vested interest in maintaining the system.
It's like the crab bucket mentality, but it's fully institutionalized. It's baked into the architecture.
It's the ultimate security system for the status quo. Think about it. In a binary system like masters and slaves, it is relatively easy to organize a revolution.
Right, because the slaves have nothing to lose, and they all share a single common enemy. Solidarity is just a natural byproduct of their situation. Workers of the world unite.
But in graded inequality, solidarity is mathematically impossible because the guy on floor 3 is terrified of the guy on floor 2 rising up and becoming his equal.
So he defends the system.
He values his caste status over the guy below him far more than he values his economic freedom from the guy above him.
That is just... It's so bleak. It means the oppressed are effectively drafted into the police force of their own oppression. They police each other.
They are entirely complicit. And this, by the way, is exactly why Ambedkar was so incredibly skeptical of the communists and Marxists of his time.
How did the Marxists view caste back then?
The Marxist view was very standard. They said, hey, caste is just a superstructure. It's a side effect of feudal economics. Once we have the proletarian revolution, once we destroy capitalism and the landlords, class war will dissolve caste automatically.
They thought fixing the money would fix the social hierarchy.
Right. And Ambedkar countered that by saying, no, caste is the barrier to your class war.
Because the working class is completely divided against itself.
Exactly. You can't unite the proletariat if half the proletariat refuses to share a glass of water with the other half. And we have a perfect historical example in the notes here that backs Ambedkar up, the Telangana struggle.
Tell us about Telangana. This proves his point perfectly.
So the Telangana struggle was this massive, violent peasant uprising. You had Dalit laborers, the lowest of the low, fighting shoulder to shoulder with upper caste communists.
Because they were both poor.
Right. They were united by economic class. And together, they fought to seize land from these wealthy, oppressive, feudal landlords. It looked like the absolute perfect Marxist revolution playing out in real time.
The binary was finally forming, the poor uniting against the rich.
But look what happened when they actually won. Once the landlords were chased off and the land was seized, it was time to distribute it. And suddenly, the upper caste comrades turned around and said, "Wait a minute, we can't let the Dalits own land, they're untouchables."
That is unbelievable. They fought a literal war together, but the revolution stopped the second it hit the caste line.
Ambedkar called it the infection of Brahmanism. He pointed out that this infection survived the communist revolution intact. It proved that caste identity runs much, much deeper than economic class interest.
So you can't just change the economic reality.
You have to change the mind. You have to change the underlying software that tells the comrade on floor 3 that he is better than the comrade on floor 2.
Which brings us directly to the mind of the system, the software that runs this whole horrifying hardware. The scripture.
The scriptural indictment. This is the part the organizers in Lahore were begging him to cut.
His diagnosis of the root cause. Ambedkar makes this brilliant distinction here between a religion of rules and a religion of principles. And I actually found this framework really helpful just for thinking about ethics in general, beyond just this historical context.
It is a profound philosophical framework. Ambedkar argues that the problem isn't just that there are bad people. The problem is that there are dutiful people who are following a very bad script.
A bad manual. Let's define the two. What is a religion of principles?
A religion of principles is based on broad moral ideals, things like love thy neighbor or liberty, equality, fraternity. He says this type of religion is truly spiritual because it requires you to think.
It treats you like an adult.
Exactly. If the guiding principle is justice and you encounter a new situation, you have to use your intellect and your conscience to figure out what the just action is. It demands intellectual responsibility.
Okay, so then what is a religion of rules?
A religion of rules is like a cookbook or a highly specific technical manual. It doesn't say be a good person. It says do exactly this ritual at 8 a.m. Don't eat this specific food. Only marry this specific type of person.
It's mechanical.
Highly mechanical. When you are just following a rigid list of rules, you aren't using your conscience. You are just using your obedience. Ambedkar argues that this robs the individual of their freedom. It turns a human being into an unthinking machine.
And his big diagnosis is that Orthodox Hinduism had become a religion of rules.
Yes. Based on texts like the Vedas and especially the Manusmriti, it was a manual. And the catastrophic problem was that this specific manual explicitly commanded inequality. It codified the dehumanization. The Manusmriti is not subtle about it. It prescribes horrifying punishments, things like pouring molten lead into the ears of a Shudra just for accidentally hearing the sacred text being recited. It legally treats women as property.
So Ambedkar's point to those moderate reformers was, you can't just walk around telling people to be nicer.
Yeah.
While they're holding a holy book that explicitly tells them to be cruel.
Right. As long as the masses believe that this manual is the literal divine word of God, they will follow it. They will do what it says.
If I truly believe that touching an untouchable will literally pollute my soul or ruin my karma, then discriminating against them doesn't feel like hate to me. It feels like piety.
Precisely. It becomes a religious duty. And that is the true horror of the system. The oppressor doesn't even feel like an oppressor. He feels like a good, devout person just following the rules.
And this is where Ambedkar brings up karma, right? He talks about how karma is weaponized.
It is used as the ultimate psychological gaslighting tool.
How so?
Well, if you are born into the bottom floor, poor, oppressed, treated terribly, the orthodox interpretation of karma tells you that this is happening because you sinned in a past life.
You brought this on yourself.
You are just serving a cosmic sentence. And if your suffering is divinely just, then rebelling against it is a sin.
It completely paralyzes the will to resist. Why fight a system that the universe itself ordained?
Ambedkar realized that to liberate the person, you couldn't just offer economic uplift. You had to break the sanctity of the book. You had to destroy the manual. He said you must apply dynamite to the Vedas and the Shastras.
Apply dynamite. That is such a violent, aggressive image from someone who is fundamentally a constitutionalist, a man of laws.
It really shows the depth of his desperation and his clarity. He knew you couldn't untie a knot this tight. You had to blow it up.
So we have the structure laid out, the division of laborers. We have the mechanism that maintains it, graded inequality, and we have the root software, the religion of rules. This is the heavy intellectual package he drops on India in 1936.
And naturally, when you drop a bomb like that, the biggest voice in the country is going to respond.
Enter Mahatma Gandhi. Now, we need to handle this section really carefully because for most people listening, Gandhi and Ambedkar are both seen as the good guys, of history. They're both anti-colonial heroes. They're both fighting for a free India.
But when you actually read their exchange regarding this undelivered speech, you realize they were fighting for two completely different versions of what India should be.
They were fundamentally at odds, and we have to be impartial here. We're just presenting the two conflicting visions objectively.
So let's look at Gandhi's side first. Gandhi responds to Ambedkar's published text in his own journal, which was called Harijan, and he titles his response, A Vindication of Caste.
Which is a title that is really not aged well at all.
No, it sounds terrible to modern ears. But Gandhi was a highly sophisticated thinker. We have to understand his premise. He was not defending untouchability. He hated untouchability. He campaigned against it constantly.
Okay, so what was he defending?
He was trying to save what he saw as the soul of Hinduism. To do that, he tried to draw a very firm line between caste, which he saw as a corruption, and varna, which he saw as the ideal.
Okay, this distinction between caste and varna is something I always get tangled up in.
Yeah.
How did Gandhi define the difference?
For Gandhi, caste was the messy, cruel reality on the ground. The thousands of petty subdivisions, the hatred, the don't touch me attitudes. He condemned all of that as a corruption of the faith.
So caste is the corrupted practice. What is varna?
Varna, to Gandhi, was the original, pure, ideal state. The classic fourfold division of society. You have learning and teaching for the Brahmin, defense for the Kshatriya, trade and agriculture for the Vaishya, and service for the Shudra.
So he essentially thought those four original buckets were functionally good. We had just messed up the execution over the centuries.
Exactly. He believed Varna was a law of nature. He argued that heredity is a fundamental biological law. You are born with certain innate tendencies inherited from your ancestors.
So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Right. And he thought that if everyone just humbly followed their hereditary duty, if the carpenter's son happily became a carpenter and the priest's son became a priest, society would be perfectly harmonious.
But wait, how is that not just the division of laborers we just talked about? It only works if, and this is a massive if, we treat all those different jobs as completely socially equal.
And that was Gandhi's big caveat. He said the problem isn't the hereditary jobs, the problem is the hierarchy. He believed we needed a change of heart.
A moral persuasion.
Yes. Spiritual purification. He believed we could persuade the upper castes to realize that the scavenger is just as spiritually important as the priest. If we can respect all labor equally, then the hereditary system is actually beautiful because it prevents cutthroat competition. It stops the rat race.
So Gandhi's solution wasn't to smash the structure. It was to spiritually purify it, to paint it with love and mutual respect.
That's why he popularized the term Harijan, meaning children of God, to refer to the untouchables. He wanted to bring them back into the Hindu fold, open the temples to them, and say, we love you, you are part of our family.
Integration through charity and love.
Yes. He defended the scriptures by saying the Shastras are fundamentally sound. They've just been misinterpreted by flawed humans over time.
Okay. So that is Gandhi's defense. I am guessing Ambedkar did not buy this separate but equal, let's just love each other argument for a second.
He tore it into absolute shreds. Ambedkar's rebuttal to Gandhi is, honestly, one of the finest pieces of forensic logic you will ever read. He dismantled the defense piece by piece.
Where did he start?
He started by attacking the very premise of Varna. He said Gandhi is totally wrong to separate Varna and caste. Varna is not the cure for caste. Varna is the parent of caste.
It's the root cause.
Exactly. Ambedkar argued that if you keep the ideal of assigning status by birth, you will inevitably eventually get the corruption of untouchability. You cannot have the four large buckets without them eventually fracturing into thousands of hateful little shards.
It's a slippery slope that always leads to the same outcome.
Then he attacks the heredity argument. Gandhi said heredity is a law of nature. Ambedkar says, how is compelling a man to follow his father's trade not just a form of slavery?
Right. It denies human agency.
It denies freedom. If you force a person into a role, regardless of their own desires or skills, you are treating them as a function, not a human being.
And what about the separate but equal idea?
Yeah.
The Gandhian hope that we can keep the hereditary roles but eliminate the hierarchy.
Ambedkar called that a complete fantasy. He wrote, you cannot have a label without a rank.
You cannot have a label without a rank.
If you categorize people by birth, you will inevitably create a hierarchy. It is human nature. You can't tell people you are fundamentally different by birth and then expect them to treat each other as absolute equals. One group will always assert superiority.
It reminds me of the whole separate but equal legal doctrine in the American South during Jim Crow. The equal part is a myth. It never actually happens in practice.
Never, because the separation itself is an act of establishing superiority. And that brings us to the terminology. Ambedkar furiously rejected the term Harijan.
He didn't want to be called a child of God.
He found it incredibly patronizing. He didn't want the paternalistic love of the upper castes. He didn't want them to open their temples out of charity. He wanted political power.
He wanted rights.
He said, I don't want to be your dependent child. I want to be a citizen with enforceable rights. He argued that Dalits needed separate political electorates to protect themselves, not just a change of heart from their oppressors.
It really boils down to two entirely divergent paths for the country. Gandhi wanted to save the traditional village family through moral uplift.
His organization was the Harijan Sevak Sangh, focused on service, temple entry, interdining.
And Ambedkar wanted to build a modern democratic city of laws.
His organization was the Bahishkrit Hitakarini Sabha. Their motto was educate, agitate, organize. One is rooted in spiritual charity, the other is rooted in political revolution.
And this revolution that Ambedkar was pushing for, it had another layer. A layer that I think a lot of people overlook when they just talk broadly about caste discrimination.
Yeah.
And that layer is gender.
Yes. The gateway concept.
This part of the deep dive completely blew my mind, because in modern discourse, we so often treat sexism and casteism as two separate parallel problems. But Ambedkar argues they are the exact same beast.
They are completely intertwined. You cannot have one without the other. And he lays this out mathematically in a much earlier paper he wrote in 1916 called Castes in India.
Walk us through his logic here. How does gender control equal caste control?
Okay, let's go back to the basic definition of what a caste actually is. It is a closed group. To keep a group closed, you have to ensure that the people inside it only marry other people inside it.
Endogamy.
Endogamy. Marrying within the group. Ambedkar says this is the only truly unique characteristic of caste. So, for the caste to survive, the elders have to strictly police the sexuality and marriage choices of the members, specifically the women.
He calls women the gateways to the caste system.
Because if a woman marries an outsider, the gate opens, the boundary of the caste dissolves.
So controlling women is a structural necessity to keep the walls up.
Exactly. And this strict rule of endogamy leads to what Ambedkar calls the problem of the surplus.
This part sounds so cold and clinical, the surplus.
It is incredibly cold. It's pure demographic logic applied to human lives. Imagine a closed caste group, 10 men, 10 women, they all pair off perfectly. 5 couples.
Right.
But then one husband dies, suddenly you have a widow. You have a surplus woman.
Now, in a free society, she would just grieve. And eventually, maybe she remarries whoever she happens to fall in love with.
But in a rigid caste society, she is a massive demographic threat. If she marries a man from outside the caste boundary is breached, the purity is lost. If she tries to marry a man inside the caste who is already married, it creates internal conflict and jealousy. She is a destabilizing force.
So the system has to find a way to neutralize the threat she poses.
And Ambedkar identifies 3 brutal historical methods that Orthodox Hinduism developed to deal with this surplus woman.
What's the first method?
Method 1 is sati.
Burning the widow on her husband's funeral pyre.
The ultimate permanent elimination of the surplus. You literally delete the demographic threat.
That is horrifying when you frame it as a demographic control tool.
It wasn't just religious devotion, it was boundary maintenance. Method 2 is enforced widowhood.
What does that entail?
You don't kill her, but you kill her socially. You shave her head, you strip her of all jewelry, you force her to wear plain white clothes, you completely desexualize her.
You turn her into a non-person.
You make sure she's no longer an allurement to any man, inside or outside the caste. You neutralize her reproductive potential.
Okay, so that handles the surplus woman. What about the men? Because husbands die, but wives die too.
Exactly. If a wife dies, you have a surplus man. You don't want him looking outside the caste for a new bride, because again, that breaks endogamy. But if all the women his age in the caste are already married, where does he look?
He has to look at the next generation.
Method 3. Child marriage. You book a bride before she is even of age to secure a partner for the surplus man and ensure he stays within the caste boundaries.
So sati, enforced widowhood, and child marriage. 3 of the most oppressive patriarchal practices in history. And Ambedkar is saying they aren't just random acts of cruelty by men against women. They are structural necessities to maintain the caste system.
Caste is endogamy. Endogamy is the control of women. That is his core equation. This implies that patriarchy and caste are mutually reinforcing pillars. The lower down the caste ladder you go, the more intense the exploitation of women becomes, because they are subjugated by both class and gender.
You literally cannot have caste without the subjugation of women. It's the glue holding the bricks together.
Which perfectly explains why, much later in his life, when Ambedkar was drafting laws for independent India, his biggest, most bruising legislative fight wasn't just about Dalit rights.
It was the Hindu Code Bill.
He staked his entire political career on it. He resigned from the cabinet over it. The Hindu Code Bill was an attempt to give women the legal right to divorce, the right to inherit property, and the right to choose their own partners.
He wasn't just trying to be a progressive feminist. He was executing a calculated strike against the caste system.
He was going for the gateway. If women have economic independence and the freedom to marry whoever they want, endogamy collapses overnight. And if endogamy collapses, the caste system collapses. He was attacking the foundation using constitutional law.
It is just amazing how incredibly systemic his thinking was. He's never just treating the symptoms. He's always hunting for the disease. Now, Ambedkar wasn't the only giant fighting this battle. The outline for today's deep dive mentions two other major radical figures, Jyotirao Phule and Periyar.
We should definitely touch on them to see where Ambedkar fits in the broader lineage of anti-caste resistance. It's a fascinating spectrum of radicalism.
Let's start with Phule.
Jyotirao Phule operates in the 19th century, well before Ambedkar. He is really the pioneer here. He founded the Satyashodhak Samaj, which translates to the Truth Seeker Society.
That's a great name. So what was his main approach?
His focus was entirely on education and historical narrative. He wanted to reclaim the indigenous history of the lower castes from what he viewed as Aryan myths constructed by the Brahmins.
So he was rewriting the history books.
Yes. He was the educator. He was the first to tell the masses, wait, the stories the elites tell us about our own inferiority are lies designed to keep us down. He focused heavily on opening schools for girls and lower castes.
Okay, so Phule is the educator. What about Periyar in the South?
Periyar E.V. Ramasamy was the agitator. He operated mainly in South India and led the self-respect movement. And Periyar was incredibly aggressive.
Aggressive how?
Militant rationalism and atheism. He would literally burn the Manusmriti and other scriptures in the streets. He rejected all religious traditions, all rituals, and he vehemently opposed North Indian and Hindi dominance in the South.
He was creating a massive counterculture.
He wanted to destroy the symbols of oppression entirely. He operated outside the state, leading mass protests and mocking the orthodox traditions to break their psychological hold on the people.
And so where does Ambedkar sit on this spectrum between the educator and the agitator?
Ambedkar synthesized both of their approaches, but added a crucial third element, constitutional law. He was the jurist.
The architect.
Exactly. He took Phule's deep truth-seeking and historical analysis, and he took Periyar's radical rejection of the religious traditions. But he channeled all that fiery energy into the machinery of the state.
He didn't just want to burn the old book. He wanted to write a completely new one.
That is the perfect way to put it. Unlike Periyar, who stayed outside the system to throw rocks at the windows, Ambedkar walked through the front door and became the architect of the state itself. He drafted the Indian Constitution.
Which perfectly transitions us to the modern era.
Yep.
The afterlife of this text and these ideas. We are jumping forward to today. How is Annihilation of Caste viewed now? Because honestly, for a long time, it felt like Ambedkar was, well, I don't want to say forgotten, but maybe sidelined in the global narrative.
Sidelined is a very fair word. For decades, the dominant narrative of India exported to the world was the Gandhian one. It was all about nonviolent resistance, unity against the British, spiritual triumph.
Right, the movie version of history.
Ambedkar was highly respected, but mostly safely boxed in as the father of the Constitution. You know, a statue of a man in a suit holding a book. But his radical social theory, the stuff we've been talking about today, was uncomfortable for the ruling class. It was too sharp, too disruptive.
But that has started to change recently.
It has been changing significantly. In 2014, a major annotated edition of Annihilation of Caste was published, featuring a massive introduction by the famous novelist Arundhati Roy titled The Doctor and the Saint.
And that really reignited the global debate, right? What was her core critique in that essay?
Her critique was that post-colonial India effectively invisibilized the brutal reality of caste. By focusing so heavily on Gandhi's narrative of spiritual unity, the Indian elite could pretend that the caste problem was just a minor moral failing being solved by good intentions.
While the actual structure remained completely intact.
Exactly. She points out that despite being officially a democracy, India still largely operates as an empire of caste, with extreme violence and systemic inequality still dictated by birth.
And looking at our notes here, there is some really fascinating new modern sociology expanding on Ambedkar's work, specifically this concept of the phenomenology of touch. It sounds incredibly academic, but let's try to break it down.
It sounds complex, but it's actually deeply visceral. Scholars like Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarikar are doing this brilliant work. They are using an archaeological method to explore caste.
What does that mean in this context?
It means they aren't just looking at caste as a set of legal rules or economic indicators. They are looking at it as a sensory experience. How is caste felt in the body? Through smell, through sight, and especially through touch.
So not just what are the rules, but what does it physically feel like to live in this system?
Exactly. And they talk about the paradox of touch. In the caste mindset, you actually have two different types of untouchables.
Wait, two types.
First, you have the Brahmin at the very top.
The Brahmin is untouchable.
In a specific sense, yes. You don't touch the Brahmin because he is considered too pure. He is the ideal untouchable. You keep your physical distance out of extreme reverence and holiness. If you, a lower caste person, touch him, you might pollute his purity.
Okay, I see.
And then at the bottom, you have the Dalit, the despicable untouchable. You don't touch him because society says he is inherently polluted. You keep your distance out of pure disgust.
Wow. So the physical act, the act of keeping your distance, is exactly the same in both cases, but the sociological meaning behind the distance is completely opposite.
Precisely. Distance creates divinity for one group and extreme degradation for the other. It's a tactile hierarchy. And Sarukar takes this even further. He talks about tactile ontology. He looks at how speech and writing have different levels of touchability.
How does speech have touchability?
Think about the traditional religious context. Historically, the Vedas were recited orally. Speech is evanescent. It disappears into the air the moment it is spoken. You can't physically hold it. Because of this, it was considered untouchable and therefore sacred.
So only the elite were allowed to interact with this sacred oral knowledge.
Right, it was heavily guarded. But writing is a physical act. You have to scratch it onto a palm leaf or press it into paper. It leaves a physical, touchable residue.
So writing is touchable.
And therefore, for a long time, writing was considered lower status. It was bureaucratic, record-keeping work, almost dirty compared to the purity of reciting sacred verses from memory.
That is profound. It helps explain why knowledge was hoarded in oral traditions by the upper castes for centuries.
It was a way to maintain purity, and modern scholars call this epistemicide, the intentional killing of Dalit knowledge systems and histories by controlling the medium of knowledge itself.
It really goes to show that caste isn't just about who gets what job or who has the money. It is about how we perceive reality itself, how we perceive our own physical bodies in space.
It's deeply psychological.
But we have to talk about the Constitution. Because Ambedkar wrote it, he was the chairman of the drafting committee, and he officially outlawed untouchability in Article 17. So on paper, legally speaking, he won. The structure was abolished.
That is the great tragedy and the massive paradox of modern India. He won the legal battle, yes, but the broader war is incredibly complicated. Critics today argue that what actually happened wasn't annihilation, but transplantation.
Transplantation, moving it from one place to another.
Exactly. We moved caste from the realm of religious, moral duty and transplanted it into the realm of bureaucratic category.
Explain how that works in practice.
Well, to fix the historical injustice, the modern government has to identify who actually suffered. They have to know who is lower caste so they can provide affirmative action, what they call reservations in India, for schools and government jobs.
Which makes sense. You have to measure the problem to fix it.
But to measure it, the Constitution has to list the castes. It has to officially define them. It counts them in the census.
So to fight caste discrimination, you have to constantly label everyone by their caste.
Exactly. The Constitution, which was supposed to be a document of equality, became a casteographic document. We are using the tool of caste to try and fix the damage of caste.
And the criticism is that doing this has essentially naturalized the identity.
Instead of annihilating the label like Ambedkar wanted, the bureaucracy has solidified it. Now, your political rights, your chances of getting a government job, your college admissions, they're all legally tied to that specific caste label.
And there is no sunset clause on this, right? There's no built-in date where the government says, okay, the playing field is level now. We are going to stop using these labels completely.
There is no clear mechanism for when or how the system ends, and that has led to a very complex modern reality of identity politics. You actually have groups staging massive protests, fighting the government to be officially classified as backward.
They want the lower status label to get the economic benefits.
Yes, which is a total perversion of Ambedkar's ultimate vision. He wanted a society where the concept of caste did not exist in the human mind. Instead, we ended up with a society where caste is arguably the primary currency of democratic politics.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today, and it leaves us with a really heavy, lingering question. Because Ambedkar's stated mission in 1936 was annihilation, not reform, not adjustment, total destruction of the system.
And Ambedkar's final, heartbreaking realization toward the end of his life was that legal change just isn't enough.
It's only half the battle.
You can write the best constitution in the world, you
Yeah.
can change the laws, you can overhaul the bureaucracy, but he said what India really needed was social surgery.
Right, social surgery, cutting out the rot.
You have to extract the infection from the culture. He believed that the real revolution has to happen in the mind. He called it a notional change.
A change in how we perceive reality.
It means fundamentally rejecting the ingrained idea that some human beings are born inherently superior to others. It means entirely replacing the old religion of rules with those modern principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity.
And that is the revolution that remains unfinished today.
It is entirely unfinished. The economic structures have modernized, the laws have changed, but that state of mind, that graded inequality where people feel the psychological need to have someone below them just to feel good about themselves, that is still very much alive.
It really makes you wonder, not just about India, but about how we structure society everywhere today. If we are constantly relying on these rigid identity categories, even when we do it in the name of social justice or diversity and inclusion, are we inadvertently keeping the walls up?
That is the ultimate provocative thought here.
Are we just solidifying the very boxes we claim we are trying to break out of? By constantly defining each other by our labels, are we preventing the true annihilation of hierarchy that Ambedkar was begging for almost a century ago?
Can you use the tools of the master's house to dismantle the master's house? Ambedkar tried to use the law to kill the law of caste. Whether that strategy ultimately worked is a question that every single generation, and honestly every democratic society on earth, has to answer for itself.
It's a massive, complex topic, and honestly, we have only just scratched the surface today.
Yeah.
You want to truly understand the DNA of social hierarchy, how oppression is architected, you absolutely have to read the original text, Annihilation of Caste.
It is absolutely essential reading for anyone who cares about human equality.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Keep questioning the structures around you and keep digging deeper. We will see you next time.